What's going on, everybody? Cleepus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, I'm going to be giving you my full review of the TCL 30XL to help you decide whether or not it's the right phone for you. Now, before we go any further, as always, I do want to remind you to hit that subscribe button. And in case you want to learn more about this phone, I will be linking to several other videos about it in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. Now, this phone does retail for around $179. I've only ever seen it factory unlocked, but it is compatible with most US carriers. So definitely more of an entry-level phone, but not nearly as low end as some of the sub $100 phones out there. So we are getting a pretty solid device here. For the display, we're getting a really large 6.82-inch LCD display with a 720p resolution, a PPI of 270, an aspect ratio of 20.5 by 9, and a 90% screen-to-body ratio. So the first thing that really comes to mind here is that at 6.82 inches, this is a really large display. So if you're consuming a lot of content, you are going to get a real good experience here. And with the 20:9 aspect ratio, we're getting a taller and more narrow form factor. So in landscape mode, you're going to get a pretty immersive experience here. Things are going to look real nice and cinematic. Definitely good for, again, consuming content, playing games, stuff like that. And if you're doing something like reading, browsing the web, using social media, you'll be able to fit more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. Aside from the size and dimensions, the image quality is actually pretty good as well. Seeing that this is a TCL phone, it's not really that much of a surprise. TCL has been in the TV industry long before they started making phones, and they put the same technology into these displays, and you can really tell. Despite only having a 720p resolution, things do look decently sharp, and the colors definitely look really good, and things are nice and bright too. The only thing I really don't like about this display is that the viewing angles are really not that good. As you can see, they're at least okay indoors, but if you're outside in the sun, for example, or really any bright area, it is going to be pretty hard to see. So if you live in a place like I do, where it's sunny pretty much all the time, then definitely keep this in mind. But aside from that, if you are looking for a really entry-level phone like this, and you want to make sure it has a good display, the TCL 30XL is going to be a great choice. For storage, this phone has 64GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, so pretty standard. On one hand, it's not amazing, but in this price range, it's pretty much the default. And for the average user, as long as you're mindful of what you're putting on your phone, and you make sure to use a microSD card whenever you can, 64GB is at least acceptable. But that being said, if you're more of a power user, if you're constantly downloading apps and games and stuff like that, then you might want to go for something a bit higher end that has more storage. But again, for the average user, the storage we're getting here with this phone is going to be perfectly fine. Now for security features, the TCL 30XL does have face unlock and a fingerprint scanner right here on the back. So definitely nice to get both options. Not that it's really uncommon or anything, but still great features to have. Let's give the fingerprint scanner a try real quick. There we go. One more time. And there we go. So real fast and responsive. And again, we do have face unlock here too. So if you want to use that instead, you always can. For the camera setup, we got a water drop notch design for the selfie camera. This camera is 13 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So in general, as far as features go, for a more entry level 4G phone, the camera setup here is actually really impressive. We got everything, including an ultra wide camera and a macro camera. And in this price range, it's really common for a phone to have only one or the other and not both. So seeing both features here is definitely a nice thing. And for the actual photo quality, real good as well. Sure, it's not going to be near as good as a phone 2 or 3 times the price, but honestly, for something more basic like social media, you don't really need that crazy of a camera anyway. So for more casual users who just want to get some nice photos, the camera we get with the TCL 30XL will absolutely get the job done. For video, this phone has a max recording quality of 1080p in both the rear and front cameras, so no 4K, but honestly, in this price range, no phone can record in 4K anyway, so that's no surprise at all. But for the actual video quality, just like the photo quality, I do think it actually is pretty good, especially for what it is. So if you're recording the odd video here and there, you should have no problem doing that with this phone. Now when it comes to RAM and processor, this phone has 6GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio A25 processor. Now this is one area where I'm not too crazy impressed with this phone because the performance, while being decent for an entry-level phone, is really not that great. Sure, for more basic activities like web browsing, social media, stuff like that, as long as you're not going to be on your phone all day, it will at least be good enough. But if you're doing something like mobile gaming, for example, that needs a little bit more power to run well, or again, you're just going to be on your phone a little bit more, you will notice that while this phone can get the job done, it's definitely not a very fast device. Sure, compared to plenty of other entry-level phones, like the Samsung Galaxy A13 LTE, for example, that's around the same price, this phone is quite a bit faster. But that being said, if you really care about performance, you could spend maybe a tiny bit more money and get something that's really incomparably faster. So on one hand, if you don't really care about performance too much, and you just need something that's going to get the job done, the TCL 30XL will be perfectly fine, and you should get a pretty good experience. But if you really do care about performance, and you want a phone that's actually fast, then this phone is probably not going to be it. Now, I ran a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on this phone a while ago, and here are the scores I got. So again, really not the fastest phone out there, but I do recommend running this test on your current phone and comparing your results to these, and that's going to give you a better idea of whether or not this phone's going to be an upgrade for you. Because while for most people I feel like it's probably not going to be a huge upgrade, if you're coming from an older, lower end phone, it definitely might be. And again, in general, if you're not really that concerned with performance and you're just doing basic activities anyway, the TCL 30XL will still at least get the job done. Now this phone has a 5000 mAh battery that supports 18-watt fast charging, so great there, I can't really complain at all. Sure, the fast charging isn't the best fast charging in the world, but for what it is, the charging speeds are really good, and with the 5000 mAh battery, the battery life is going to be great. So if you're on your phone a lot and you still need something that's going to last all day, then a phone like this with such a large battery is going to be a really good option for you. For the software, this phone does have Android 12. I'm not 100% sure if it's actually going to get Android 13, kind of a 50-50 chance here because on one hand, TCL is a pretty good brand and this phone is factory unlocked, so who knows maybe, but I personally wouldn't count on it. But regardless, at least we're getting a decently newer version of Android, and in my experience, the software does run well, so I don't really have a whole lot of complaints. Now, unfortunately, the TCL 30XL does not have NFC, so if you like to use tap and pay, keep in mind you're not going to be able to do that with this phone. That was a little disappointing, but honestly, considering the price range, at this point, we're still not seeing a whole lot of phones under $200 that have NFC, so I'm not really too surprised. Another thing I really like about this phone is the overall design. Despite having such a large display, it's really not too bulky, and I feel like for most people, it's still going to be perfectly comfortable to hold and carry in your pocket and everything. And even with a case, I feel like it's still not going to be too bad. Despite the phone being made entirely of plastic, except of course the display, the plastic is actually pretty heavy duty and solid, and the phone has a decent amount of weight to it despite being more of an entry-level phone. So while obviously this isn't really a rare thing, there are plenty of phones in this price range, even really good phones for that matter, that feel a little bit lighter and cheaper. But with the TCL 30XL, the build quality is really solid, and again, I really do like the materials. The design, while being really simple, still does look decent, and although I feel like a lot of people in this price range aren't going to be looking for anything premium per se, I still do appreciate that TCL at least did give us a pretty decent design here. Another cool thing about this phone's design is that unlike pretty much every phone in this price range, the TCL 30XL actually does have stereo audio. Now, in case you don't know what this means, when a phone has stereo audio, sound is going to come out of both the main speaker and the earpiece, and when it comes to entry-level phones, and even a lot of phones double the price of this one, a lot of them just don't have stereo audio, and in my experience, when a phone doesn't have stereo audio, the phone speaker is not going to sound nearly as good. Now, of course, if you use headphones all the time anyway, this is not even going to matter, but having stereo audio and just a good quality phone speaker in general definitely does give you a little bit more flexibility when you're consuming content. But to give you an idea of what it actually sounds like, let's take a look at a sample. So as you can see there, on one hand, the sound from the earpiece itself wasn't nearly as good as a much higher end device, but in general, again, I'm still glad that we at least do get some sound from the earpiece, because for most phones like this, that's really not going to happen. But in conclusion, my overall thoughts about the TCL 30XL. In general, this is kind of a unique phone in the sense that on one hand, for what it is, I don't really have a whole lot of complaints about it. Sure, it doesn't have the best performance, an amazing display with a 1080p resolution, or features like NFC, but on the other hand, it is a sub $200 phone, so you can really only expect so much. But that being said, on the other hand, it's really right in between the really entry-level phones and the slightly higher-end mid-range 5G phones. Like honestly, you could probably get a Samsung Galaxy A23 5G for just a little bit more than this, and there's really no comparison there. The Samsung Galaxy A23 5G is on a completely different level. But on the other hand, when you compare this phone to a really entry-level phone like say a Cricket Icon 4 or something that goes for like barely over $100. This phone is also a lot better. And the other thing to consider here is that again, as far as I know, this phone is only factory unlocked. I haven't actually seen it with any carriers, and now I could be wrong about this, but if that is true, if you can only get this phone unlocked, then you're most likely not going to get any crazy deals on it. So while on one hand, there are some phones kind of like this that you can get for basically free, with this phone you will be paying somewhere near full price most likely. And at $179, if you're willing to spend just a little bit more, you can get something much better. So in general, if you really are only looking for an entry-level phone phone for more basic activities, I do think the TCL 30XL is a great option if you're just gonna get it and keep it for a really long time. But honestly, if you just need a temporary low-end phone to hold you over, I would definitely not get this phone, because depending on your carrier, you could get something kind of comparable for a lot less money. And on the other hand, if you want something a little bit better, again, depending on carrier deals, there are gonna be some much better options out there for not a whole lot more. So at the end of the day, while this phone is really good for an entry-level phone in my opinion, and for what it is, I don't really have any real complaints about it, unless you don't really care about deals and you just want to get a phone that's going to do what you need it to do and nothing else. Aside from that situation, I feel like for most people, despite this phone being good and all, with the deals most carriers are offering, you probably are going to have some much better options. But this concludes my review of the TCL 30XL. Again, if you want to learn more about this phone, I will be linking to several other videos about it in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.